Hey y'all, and welcome to the next part of my summer ranking series. This week we'll be going through my top 30 2025 running back watch list, aka my summer running back rankings. There are so many talented backs in this upcoming draft cycle that I did the top 30 backs, and I still feel like there are likely some backs that I probably missed out on. So let me know if there's any running backs you'd recommend that I check out. A couple of other things I wanted to point out before we get started. Just like with the quarterback rankings, these aren't as in-depth as my player profiles and evals during the draft season, but more of a quick summary of the player after a rewatch. Also, I may be having some trouble getting the chapters to work for the video, but if you want to jump to specific players, all you have to do is just go to the description and I should have all the players timestamped there. Also, if you want to check out my QB rankings video, you can check it out with the link that should be on the screen now if I did that right. Now then, let's get going on one of the deepest groups of the entire 2025 draft class. Starting out at number 30, we have Marcus Carroll out of Missouri. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 210 pounds, and he'll be about 23 years old on draft night in 2025 from what I could find. He's a fifth-year senior who was at Georgia State for the past 4 seasons and broke out in 2023, then transferred to Missouri for 2024, hoping to continue his success in the SEC. For his strengths, Carroll's a good match for zone-heavy schemes with the way he can get skinny through small creases and rush through holes. He has a good eye for collapsing holes and does a good job getting through them before they seal up. Carroll also has very reliable hands and does a good job using good hand technique and routinely catches the ball away from his body. He isn't the most explosive with the ball in his hands in the open field, but he does have a decent transition from receiver to runner. I was also impressed with Carroll's awareness to roll into open areas of the field against zone and knowing where to settle to be an easy target for his quarterback in the flats. This is often a subtle thing, but something that quarterbacks greatly appreciate to have a real alternative option when the play breaks down. For improvements, I was a little disappointed with Carroll's contact balance, especially given the level of competition. He has solid size, but he always seemed to go down with the first hit and go down from arm tackles. Part of the issue is that he wants to try to juke out defenders, but often needs too many additional steps to be able to execute that move, and that allows defenders to catch up and get him sideways after he's lost his forward momentum. I would also like to see Carroll run with a bit more patience. He does have good bursts to go through the initial hole, but often comes in too hard at the second level and doesn't give him enough opportunity to be able to make the defenders miss, or will end up running into his own blocker. Carroll also just needs to show more experience in gap runs, with a number of NFL teams shifting to more gap runs. Georgia State was a very zone-heavy team, and Missouri leans to more zone than gap, but he should have more opportunity to prove himself in gap runs this coming year. In conclusion, Carroll is a player that admittedly doesn't really excite me. Maybe he takes a step forward this following year, but I don't think he'll be as productive as some of the other recent small school older backs that we saw come into the SEC like Ray Davis and Cody Schrader. I think he could be a decent college running back, but I don't have high hopes for him in the NFL at this time. Next, number 29, we have E.J. Smith out of Texas A&M. While he likely is not on most people's radar, I included him on my summer scouting last year, so I want to be sure to include him here as well. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 210 pounds, and he'll be nearly 23 years old on draft night in 2025. I've seen him listed as a fifth-year senior on some sites, but he barely played as a freshman and missed most of his third year due to injury, so I'm going to count him as a redshirt senior. He was at Stanford the past 4 years, but transferred to Texas A&M for the 2024 season. For strengths, Smith is a natural pass catcher despite all the missed time. He has soft hands and a very smooth and efficient transition from receiver to runner. He also showed the ability to adjust to poorly thrown balls, which makes him even more of a viable threat in the receiving game. Also, Smith didn't have a lot of rushing opportunities this past year, but in the attempts he was given, he showed good vision and good patience. He also does a good job hugging his blocks and keeping an eye out for cutback lanes. Also, Smith didn't have as good contact balance as his 2021 year, but is definitely still an asset of him thanks to his pad level and good balance. He also has quick feet to give him a chance to make defenders miss in the open field. For improvements, Smith didn't fumble this past year, but has had a high number of fumbles throughout his career. If I were to use all of his touches for my balls carrier scale, he would grade out as a D+. Like I said though, he didn't fumble this past year, so hopefully he can continue to improve on this and minimize the fumbles this coming season. Also, Smith is a willing blocker but not the most efficient one. He has a tendency to lunge and duck his head, and in general is too easy to get past given his size. Hopefully the technique can eventually match his effort though. I also have questions about how great of an athlete Smith is, especially after all of his injuries. He doesn't seem to have great speed and his burst is lacking. If those are truly issues of his, it becomes even harder to justify seeing him making the NFL when combined with his injury history. In conclusion, there's a lot of question marks for Smith between his health and his ability as a rusher. If he were to be able to put together a fully healthy season with more usage, he might be able to make it more clear if he's limited just a receiving threat or if there's more to his game. Next, at number 28, we have Mario Anderson out of Memphis. He likely isn't on a lot of people's radar either, but he caught my eye while watching the South Carolina prospects for 2023, so I want to take another look at him. He's listed on ESPN at 5'9", 208 pounds, and he'll be 24 years old on draft night in 2025. He's a six-year senior who played his first 4 seasons in Division II at Newberry College, then transferred to play at South Carolina for the 2023 season. Now for 2024, he transferred to Memphis. For his strengths, Anderson has a great center of gravity and can sustain hits and stay upright. He runs a really good pad level and has really strong legs that help him stay up and pinball off of hits at times. Also, almost all of Anderson's rush attempts were zone runs, so there is a bit of a question if he can handle both zone and gap runs. However, his eye for finding openings in zone and his patience with his blocks was really great to see and something that should continue at Memphis. He also does a really good job hugging his blocks and getting skinny through tight creases. Also, Anderson is the fastest player, but he does have really good burst that makes him a good fit for zone runs. His burst lets him blow through openings and pick up more yards than a lot of other backs his speed typically could get. For improvements, Anderson has a bit too many drops for the limited targets that he got. He had 3 drops on 28 targets last year and is more of a body catcher and doesn't routinely snatch the ball with his hands. Drops can definitely be fluky, but the lack of good hand technique is concerning and something he needs to clean up this coming season. Anderson also looked overwhelmed with defenders' size and blocking situation. He often had a good start to his technique, but would be pushed back due to their size. His feet were also too static when taking on the block, which also allowed the defenders to get some good push on him or just blow past him. Also, between Anderson's age and lack of great athleticism, there's a lot of question marks about how much upside he can provide for an NFL offense. In conclusion, while his ceiling is limited and his age is quite high, he is a bit of an interesting runner. If he had more reliable hands and better pass blocking, I'd probably throw out a comp to Mike Davis, as I feel I always want to comp bigger, more compact rushers like Anderson to Davis. But as I said, he needs to improve his hands and pass blocking to prove he can earn a role in the NFL. Next, number 27, we have Alton McCaskill out of Arizona State. He's listed on ESPN at 6'1", 200 pounds, and he'll be 22 years old on draft night in 2025. He's a redshirt junior who played his first 2 years at Houston, then transferred to Colorado after tearing his ACL prior to the 2022 season, but had a bit of a weird situation where he came back early in the 2023 season, and then after 4 games asked to be shut down to use his redshirt year. So he may have not felt like he was fully back and didn't want to risk re-injury for the 2023 season. For the 2024 season, he's looking to return healthier at Arizona State. For his strengths, McCaskill is a very reliable receiver who showed good production as a receiver in his freshman year. He catches the ball with good hand technique and consistently catches the ball away from his body. McCaskill also has very good vision and nice curvilinear movement to be able to help him move around defenders and blocks. He also is a very patient runner with a good eye for cutback lanes and does a good job hugging his blocks. He also had a near 50-50 split of zone and gap runs in 2021 and has success in both. Though McCaskill has nice curvilinear movement, he can also go into sprinter mode and start to break away from defenders in the open field as well. For improvements, this likely was due to his injury, but McCaskill had little to no burst last year. He didn't have great burst in 2021 with some difficulty making sharp changes in direction, so this getting worse made things even more difficult for him this past season. Hopefully another year removed from the injury gets us back to where it was before. McCaskill's contact balance was also disappointing last year and was even disappointing when he was healthy. There are too many times when he would allow the first defender to take him down and would often be taken down by light arm tackles. He also didn't have the drive to finish through tackles and instead tried to sidestep them. We're also just getting further and further away from McCaskill's last productive season. We can look back at his 2021 play and be impressed with it all we want, but it doesn't mean anything if he can't prove that he's fully healthy this coming season. In conclusion, McCaskill showed a lot of promise and talent as a freshman, but we're pretty far removed from his play back then. Even just putting in a fully healthy season would be huge for him. I think he may need to show at least 2 healthy seasons before getting a chance of getting decent draft capital, but we'll see what happens this coming season. Next, number 26, we have one of my favorite sleepers in this group, Jalen Buckley out of Western Michigan. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 210 pounds, and he'll be about 21 years old on draft day in 2025 from what I could find. He's a redshirt sophomore who broke out as a starter at Western Michigan last year. For his strengths, Buckley has great speed and can easily blow past defenders. Some people may look at playing against lesser competition and suggest it's just him beating down on slower competition, but he was doing the same thing against his tougher matchups. He has great long speed and really quick acceleration to be able to get to full speed in a hurry. Buckley also has tremendous burst and is a one-cut runner who can explode out of his cut to drive downfield and use his acceleration to pick up a huge gain. His burst was apparent in his rush attempts and his receptions. Buckley also does a good job hugging his blocks to take efficient pass downfield. It often takes young backs a while to develop that habit, but Buckley doing this so early let him be so productive early in his career. For improvements, I would really like to see Buckley improve his hands to be able to be more of a dynamic weapon in the receiving game. He's good when he has the ball in his hands, but getting there can be a bit of an adventure with 4 drops on his 24 targets this past season. He also sometimes has a bit of a clap attack with his approach to the ball, and will just need to have some more practice reps to clean this up. Buckley's pass blocking is a bit of a work in progress as well. He is often delayed in recognizing his target and comes into his blocks with a weak, narrow base and too upright to hold his ground. Pass blocking takes time to develop, so I'm hoping more experience this year will also help this as well. Buckley also mostly goes full speed in all of his runs. That's great when there's an opening for him, but gets him in trouble when the line is congested and he ends up just running into the blockers' backs. He needs to find that balance of maintaining good speed, but having that patience to allow his blockers to set up and take his game to the next level on the ground. In conclusion, Buckley has my interest, but I want to see him have a better skill set in the pass game to really be in on him. I think both his hands and pass blocking are things that he can improve this offseason, with his hands just needing more practice reps, and Buckley having the size to perform better in pass blocking opportunities. So I'm excited to see how he develops this upcoming season and see if he can follow through and be a big-time riser. Next, number 25, we have Gavin Sawchuk out of Oklahoma. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 198 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 9 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a redshirt sophomore who's been at Oklahoma for the past 2 seasons and started to pick up steam as the year went on last year, which he hopes to continue in 2024. For strengths, Sawchuk has good awareness to be able to hug blocks even as a player with limited experience. He does a good job taking an optimal route when running the ball and even uses some tempo in his runs to make the most of his blocking. There are definitely some times when he doesn't make the right read where he should take the ball, but this seemed to improve as the year went on and hopefully will continue to improve with more experience. Sawchuk also is the most explosive runner, but has really nice burst and acceleration to get to full speed very quickly. He's very much a one-cut runner where he can plant his foot and drive upfield and get to full speed very quickly to get big gains on the ground. Also, Sawchuk didn't get a lot of targets last year due to his limited playing time early in the year, but showed good hand technique and also showed that he's capable of making some catches away from his body. For improvements, Sawchuk is a very willing blocker, but is really delayed in recognizing his assignment, as he often gets tunnel vision as a blocker and is slow to pick up his rusher even when they come through a big opening. Like I mentioned with Buckley, pass protection is also something that can come with more experience, so hopefully this improves for the 2024 season. Sawchuk also just isn't able to finish runs. It's not too surprising with his size, and it's not so much that he runs with bad pad level, but he just had too many times when he'd be taken down by the first defender. As he looks to prove that he has starter caliber talent, he'll need to show this improvement to be able to show that he's not going to have to be taken off the field in short yardage situations. Sawchuk also will need to work on holding onto the ball more. He really only has 1 year to go off of, but his ball security would have graded out as a C- using my ball handling scale for the 2023 season. As I said though before, this is only based off of 1 year, and ball security can fluctuate from year to year, so we'll see if this is much of an issue next year. In conclusion, Sawchuk is an interesting player who could rise in the rankings this year. If he can limit the turnovers with more usage and play with better contact balance, he could be in for a big year in the upcoming season and could prove that he's a versatile weapon. Next, number 24, we have Jaquavius Woody Marks out of USC. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 210 pounds, and he'll be 24 years and 4 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a fifth-year senior who's been at Mississippi State for the past 4 seasons, but transferred to USC for the 2024 season. For strengths, Marks is a great receiving option and has a record for most receptions of any player, including receivers, at Mississippi State. Marks came out of his career red hot with 60 receptions in his freshman year and 83 receptions in his sophomore year. Those numbers unfortunately declined in his final 2 years at Mississippi State, but he still has quality hands, quick transition from receiver to runner, and ability to play some snaps from the slot that he showed earlier in his career. While I have some issues with Marks as a runner, he runs with good tempo and a good understanding of how to set up and use his blocks. He knows when to hit the brakes and to have his blocks help him out, and can use his burst to blast through once the block is set. Speaking of burst, Marks has some solid burst, being able to make a quick cut and blast up field. This also gives him some juice in his jump cuts against defenders in space. For improvements, Marks just hasn't been able to put up great numbers on the ground. He is playing in an air raid offense, which some will bring up as a reason for his poor production, and while there is some truth to that, the inefficiency still can't be explained by this, as that let him face some lighter boxes, and he should have came away with much more in his limited opportunities. I also wasn't overly impressed with his vision. I found that he was too hesitant and didn't always do a great job reading the leverage of his blocks. This may be less of an issue if a team primarily plans to use him in the passing game, but this will definitely limit his potential role in the NFL. Marks also has a bit of trouble staying upright and withstanding hits. He generally can fall forward, but I would like to see him play with slightly better center of gravity at times and break through more arm tackles. Marks is a solid player and who will likely be a rotational player at best in the NFL. He kind of reminds me a bit of Michael Carter, as both can offer some good use in the receiving game, and USC has gotten their backs involved in the passing game and running routes, so hopefully Marks can get his receiving production back on track and trending towards what he did in his first 2 seasons. Next, number 23, we have Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 210 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 4 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a senior who's been at Auburn for the past 3 seasons. For his strengths, Hunter has great burst as he's a very shifty back. He also does a good job using this burst to plant his foot and accelerate downfield once he sees an opening in the defense. He also has good shiftiness to make defenders miss in space. Hunter's improved contact balance with the weight he added in the past offseason also impressed me. He was able to survive way more arm tackles and had good strength and balance to keep himself going to finish 4 runs going forward. Also, Hunter's ball security was a weakness for me last summer, but he did a better job holding onto the ball at a better rate despite an increased number of touches. I'm hoping he can keep this up this coming season and show that this isn't a major issue for him. For improvements, I would really like to see Hunter be a more patient runner. There were too many times when he was rushing things into the offensive line, and sometimes when he wouldn't give his blocks the time to develop and would just bounce a run outside. In general, it also just felt like his vision took a step back this last season, unfortunately. Hunter wasn't asked to pass block very often, and I think this was intentional. There were a number of times when he seemed overwhelmed by the defender's larger size and approached him with very little power due to being too upright. He could help to improve this by getting more bend in his knee, but I think this will be something he has trouble with in the NFL. I also feel like Hunter is an adequate athlete with good quickness, decent speed, and average size, but I just don't know if he's that dynamic of an athlete to be preferred over some of the other receiving backs in this group. Also, I'm not sure if he's strong enough as a runner either to justify him being used over some of the other backs. In conclusion, I feel Hunter may still be in that backup category for me. He's decent at a lot of things, but there isn't a whole lot that makes him stand out as a prospect and demand playing time in the NFL. That being said, I think he has a chance to earn a roster spot for an NFL team as a backup thanks to his well-rounded play. Next, number 22, we have LeQuint out of Syracuse. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 195 pounds, and he'll be 20 years and 8 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who's been at Syracuse for the past 2 seasons and broke out last year as his first year as a starter with Sean Tucker gone. For strengths, Allen has great breakaway speed and acceleration to let him blow past defenders. Allen is also a very smooth runner with the ball, and he can make quick cuts but can also move with curvilinear movement to help adjust his route to get blockers in front of him. His movement skills were so impressive that Syracuse moved to use the Wildcat formation with him more when Schrader went down with an arm injury. Allen also showed a lot of potential as a receiver. He has good hands and a very quick transition from receiver to runner, and he also showed that he could handle a high volume of targets and took a fair number of snaps from both in the slot and out wide. He could definitely work to read his blocks a bit better, but in general understood that his job was to get downfield and pick up easy yards. For improvements, Allen's a very upright runner, which allows him to be at full speed for more of his runs, but sacrifices his contact balance and really minimizes the gains that he can get after taking hits. The breakaway speed is great, but if he can't get much drive or breakthrough tackles, he's going to be extremely reliant on the offensive line he plays with in the NFL. Allen also fell for the trap that a lot of runners with great speed do, which is trying to rely too much on his speed and bounce runs outside unnecessarily. If he can find that balance using acceleration and burst to break up field and cutback lanes, he could be a more consistent and dangerous home run hitter. Allen also just doesn't seem to be very creative in open space. He often just tries to run around the defender with his speed or tries to go through the defender, which has fluctuating results. As I mentioned, he has some really nice explosiveness, so I'd really like to see him use that in the open space more consistently. In conclusion, Allen has the explosiveness, speed, and hands to be a really dangerous player, but needs to work to overcome his smaller frame. If he can play a better pad level and contact balance, He could become a really exciting player in this group. Next, number 21, we have Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 190 pounds, and he'll be 20 years and 7 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who's been at Tennessee for the past 2 seasons, but is looking to have a bigger impact for the 2024 season with Jalen Wright gone. For strengths, it should just be a given for a Tennessee runner to have a great burst at this point. Sampson has great speed and acceleration to allow him to blow through holes and pick up great gains while being a great fit for Tennessee's offense. Also, even in a limited role, Sampson's hands really stood out. He catches the ball with great hand technique and always snatches the ball away from his frame. He also has a very efficient transition from receiver to runner and uses acceleration and burst to quickly move upfield. Sampson can work to get stronger and more built as he has a smaller frame, but his pad level gives him the best chance to succeed at his lighter weight. He consistently runs with good pad level and consistently drives his legs through defenders and hits. Like I said, it doesn't always lead to great results, but the effort and consistency are good to see and could lead to his contact balance being a strength if he puts some weight on. For improvements, Sampson could work to improve his vision as he often rushes his run attempts and doesn't always give his blocks time to develop. As an example, Wright had some vision issues as well, but showed more patience when setting up his blocks. So hopefully that is something Tennessee's running back coach works out with Sampson like they did with Wright. Sampson also benefited from a small workload and needs to show that he can keep up his production for the majority of games throughout the season. Now, when he did get a bigger workload last year against Kentucky and Iowa, he still looked very productive, so that's really promising. But he just needs to show this over the course of the full 2024 season. Just as a number of people pointed out with Jalen Wright in the last draft cycle, Sampson also benefited from a high number of light boxes that often put his offensive line in one-on-one situations and made his life very easy for him to be able to read his blocks and find an opening. This will continue to be something he benefits from in the 2024 season and may make some teams nervous about his fit in their scheme. In conclusion, Sampson is the next explosive runner from Tennessee. I see Wright as a much better player at this time, and he still fell to the 4th round of the 2024 draft. However, Sampson has a chance to really rise up these rankings if he shows that he can handle a bigger workload and keep up the production throughout the season. Next, number 20, we have Roman Hemby out of Maryland. He's listed on ESPN at 6'2", 202 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 8 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a redshirt junior who's been with Maryland for his entire college career. For strengths, Hemby has great hands as one of the more natural pass catchers in this group. He consistently uses good hand technique and has a very efficient transition from receiver to runner to ensure he picks up yards after the catch. He also seems to have a good understanding of route tempo and could make good cuts to get himself open. Hemby also has good movement skills in general, being able to smoothly change direction, but also having the burst to break upfield and use his acceleration to get to full speed in a hurry. Hemby is also a very willing pass blocker. I purposely didn't put him as a strong pass blocker, as I feel he can be a bit awkward at times with his approach, but he's always willing to pick up a block, and more often than not will hold his ground thanks to his effort. For improvements, Hemby really needs to work on his patience and eye for leverage. He too often would rush his approach and not let his blocks develop or take suboptimal paths, either missing open holes or taking himself into congested areas. Hemby also has disappointing contact balance. There are too many times when the first tackler would be able to bring him down, and he also didn't have great drive or finish to his runs, which was also really disappointing and could further limit what he's capable of. Hemby also just hadn't been able to show that he can handle a full workload. He only has 6 games of 20 or more touches in his 28 college career games, so he might be able to handle a bigger workload since he has some productive games with heavier workloads, but it's just something he needs to prove and do more consistently this coming season. In conclusion, I think Hemby is a solid player that certainly has the ability to be a committee back on third down and receiving situations. It's not a great comp since the sizes aren't exactly similar, but there's a lot to him that reminds me of Jerome Ford. So if you were a fan of Ford, you'll likely be in on Hemby. Personally, I just have questions about his vision and overall ability as a workhorse, which holds him back from being higher on these rankings. Next, number 19, we have Kaytron Allen out of Penn State. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 221 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 3 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who's been the running mate of Nicholas Singleton for the past 2 seasons at Penn State. For strengths, Allen is a bruiser with really nice contact balance. He runs with good pad level and brings a lot of strength to his runs to routinely finish his runs going forward. Also, I saw his pass blocking grade on PFF was low, which I found surprising since I really don't think he's bad at pass blocking. He does do a bit of lunging, but is quick to recognize his assignment, has good knee bend, and has his hands ready to take on his target. He also has good, very active feet to keep his target in front of him. Also, Allen ran with good vision and was very patient with his blocks developing. He also seemed to have a good eye for the leverage of his blocks and showed some ability to press the line to pick up some extra yards. For improvements, if Allen wants to be used more on passing downs outside of just being a blocker, he'll need to improve his hands. After having no drops as a freshman on 24 targets, he had 3 on 23 targets this past year. Now, like I mentioned, he had no drops in his freshman year and also catches the ball with good hand technique, so hopefully those are signs that he'll continue to return to his freshman year form, but if he continues to struggle with drops, it's going to become a concerning trend. Allen also just doesn't seem very creative in the open field, and just often relies on taking in 2 defenders. It lets him finish runs falling forward like I mentioned before, but it just also doesn't give him a lot of opportunity to get big gains on the ground. Something that also likely limits Allen in the open field is his overall athleticism. I think he's a fine athlete for his size, but his lack of top speed really shows in his game. Thankfully, he has solid burst and acceleration, but his speed in general will still limit him. In conclusion, Allen is a solid player, but I'm just not certain that he has a great ceiling. He could be a good big body back for a team, but could be a lot more if he proves he has good hands and could become a good third down back with some goal line and short yardage upside. Next, number 18, we have Jordan James out of Oregon. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 205 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 1 month old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who's been the running mate at Bucky Irving these past 2 years, but now has the opportunity to take the lead back role at Oregon for the 2024 season. For strengths, James plays with really great contact balance, running with good pad level, and consistently moving his legs to break through arm tackles and finish runs falling forward. His contact balance makes him come off a lot bigger than what his listed measurables are. James also ran the ball with good vision, running a close to even split of zone and gap runs with success in both. He does a good job hugging his blocks and seems to have a good balance of patience and urgency when allowing his blocks to develop. He also has good downfield emphasis with his runs to ensure he consistently gets good gains. He definitely benefited from some larger holes at times, but I was still pretty impressed with his vision. What also made him an effective runner was his burst. He has great burst through his cuts to be able to explode through holes and be ready to lower his shoulder into oncoming safeties. He doesn't always have the greatest long speed, but his burst and acceleration make up for that. For improvements, James has to improve his hands. It's a small sample size, but with only 18 targets, he had 2 drops in those situations. These could definitely be fluky due to the small sample size, but he does have a tendency to resort to body catches, and when he did catch away from his body, he didn't always have great hand technique. I'd also like to see James be more creative in the open field. Part of the reason why he needs to catch with his hands regularly is to have more time to gather himself and not just resort to plowing through smaller defenders. When he did have a defender in the open field, he typically resorted to just plowing through them, which will be less of an option in the NFL against larger, stronger defenders. James also benefited from a number of factors, including lighter boxes due to Oregon's offense and having more fuel in the tank as he rotated in. He definitely could continue the success he had, but just needs to prove he wasn't just benefiting from lighter playing time and scheme. In conclusion, James is a solid player that I think could rise on the list with more use this coming season. As I mentioned, his drops could have been fluky and he could continue to be a big producer with his increased usage this coming season. If those 2 things work themselves out, he could be a very nice value player for a team. Next, number 17, we have Phil Mafah out of Clemson. He's listed on ESPN at 6'1", 230 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 6 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a senior who's been playing behind Will Shipley for the past 3 seasons, but has a chance to be the main guy at Clemson this coming season. For strengths, Mafah has a big body and knows how to use it. He does a good job finishing runs falling forward thanks to his pad level, leg strength, and consistency keeping his legs churning, leading him to be a very successful short yardage back last year. I was also impressed with Mafah's vision, which stood out during the season and on rewatch. He ran a near even split of gap and zone runs and had success with both schemes. He also does a good job hugging his blocks and patiently waiting for a hole to open and getting skinny through it. While Shipley understandably got most of the receiving opportunities, Mafah showed good hand technique and reliable hands in his opportunities. Mafah doesn't rely on body catches and routinely catching the ball away from his body and having the ability to adjust to poorly placed throws. With Shipley gone, he could really show this is a big strength of his this coming season. For improvements, Mafah has to hold on to the ball better. He fumbled on 2% of his touches last season, which is a high mark and would have graded out as a D using my ball security scale for grading. Also, while Mafah has good hands, he isn't that dynamic with the ball in his hands. He can be a bit staggered in his transition from receiver to runner and doesn't have great wiggle in the open field and has to rely on lowering his shoulder. So while he can be counted on to make the catch, I wouldn't expect him to break off a big gain after the catch. I also wouldn't consider Mafah's pass protection to be a weakness, but it definitely is an area he can grow in. His technique is fine, but his base is often a bit too narrow and he lunges too much trying to sustain his block. The biggest issue for him is his diagnosis of assignment, as he's often a tick late in picking up his target. With Shipley gone and Mafah likely to have more opportunities in pass pro, I'm hoping that this is something that comes with more experience. In conclusion, I really do like Mafah even if my ranking for him isn't overly high due to his fumble issues and just due to the depth of this class. I think he could be one of the big rises in the class if he cleans up his fumbles and shows more with his opportunities in the passing game. If he does both of those, it'll be hard to argue that he isn't capable of being an every down back in the NFL. Next, number 16, we have RJ Harvey out of UCF. He's listed on ESPN at 5'8", 195 pounds, and he'll be 25 years and 2 months old on draft night in 2025 from what I could find. He's a redshirt fifth-year senior who started his career at Virginia as a quarterback, then transferred to UCF in 2020 and transitioned to running back. He was expected to have a big role in 2021, but tore his ACL before the start of the season, but was healthy for the 2022 and 2023 seasons. For strengths, Harvey is one of the smoothest movers in the open field in this group. He can make quick, hard cuts, but can also make very subtle adjustments to his running path to extend his gain. He also has good timing with his cuts to make defenders miss in space, and while he can definitely get a little sidestep happy with some of his runs, he is good at using this to bounce to holes in zone runs and pick up big gains on the ground. I was also impressed with Harvey's vision, showing success in both zone and gap runs. He has the patience to set up his blocks, and he also does a really nice job pressing the line and then bursting through his opening to pick up a big gain. Speaking of burst, Harvey's acceleration and burst are very impressive. He's able to plant his foot and instantly get to full speed, and his quickness allows him to get to full speed to get through holes in gap schemes and explode through cutback lanes and zone runs. For improvements, it may be hard for him to do anything about it, but he is undersized and it shows at times in short yardage situations. Harvey just isn't able to drive forward and finish runs consistently going forward. His size also holds him back in pass protection situations, and he can get completely overwhelmed sometimes in those situations. Another reason why Harvey doesn't always finish runs forward is due to a fair amount of unnecessary sidestepping, as I mentioned before. With some of his runs, it seems like he grew up a big fan of Le'Veon Bell with his cutting around the line of scrimmage. And a lot of times they pay off, like I mentioned before, but a number of times he's bouncing around or even starts to trail backwards, causing him to lose potential yards. Something Harvey also, of course, can't control, but an area that will knock him down for teams is his age. He'll be 25 years old on draft night, which makes him the oldest back out of this group. Last draft cycle, Blake Watson was 24 and a half years old and went undrafted in part due to his age. So it's hard for me to believe that a team would be willing to take on a 25-year-old back, especially one that is undersized and has a past ACL tear. In conclusion, I really like Harvey, but he's at an unfortunate disadvantage with his size and age. That being said, if he gets an opportunity on an NFL team, I think he could be an instant contributor with the right opportunity. Next, number 15, we have DJ Giddens out of Kansas State. He's listed on ESPN as 6'1", 212 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 6 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who played behind Deuce Vaughn his freshman year, then became the lead back for the Wildcats for 2023. For strengths, Giddens has very quick feet that lets him be a very shifty back despite his taller build. He's always making adjustments with oncoming defenders and can use his quick feet to maintain his balance and avoid ankle tackles. Giddens also does a great job getting skinny through tight creases, and even when the line and alley are collapsing, he does a good job of sneaking his way through to help pick up a gain. He's also patient with allowing his blocks to open holes and can use his jump cut to redirect himself to an opening. Giddens is also a very willing pass blocker and does a good job quickly identifying and efficiently getting square with his target. He does tend to lead with his shoulder, which can open himself up for some misses, but generally does a good job making clean contact thanks to his active feet while blocking. For improvements, I would like to see Giddens use his size more. There are too many times when he would try to juke defenders and wasn't willing to lower his pads and drive through them. He has the build to have really consistent finishes to his runs, so I'm hoping that he can lean more into that into this coming season. The other thing that doesn't let Giddens finish runs is his pad level. He's an extremely upright runner and pretty rarely will be the lowest man at contact. He also tries to get around contact, but doesn't have great timing, leading to him taking the hit while moving sideways and not having his forward momentum anymore. Also, maybe it's just because I've been watching a ton of the top backs of this group that have great bursts, but I felt his burst was average. He can get the job done with his cuts, but doesn't explode out of them and doesn't seem to have the great acceleration he often needs for the time to build up to his full speed. In conclusion, I think Giddens is a solid back, but isn't one that I'm confident can be a great back right now. He reminds me a lot of Chuba Hubbard, who I was also indifferent on when he was coming out of college. This past year, Hubbard showed that he can be an effective player with volume, but now is likely going to see his role greatly decrease with the arrival of Jonathan Brooks. I think Giddens could also come into a team and be a serviceable back, but a team may look for an upgrade if he doesn't provide that it factor as a back. Next, number 14, we have Tahj Brooks out of Texas Tech. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 230 pounds, and I believe he'll be 23 years and 11 months old on draft night in 2025 from what I could find. He's a fifth-year senior who played the last 4 seasons at Texas Tech and has been a starter for the past 2 seasons. For his strengths, Brooks has good vision and did well in both gap and zone runs with a nearly 50-50 split this past season. Brooks does a good job finding small creases and working his way through them, and does a really nice job hugging his blocks and keeping an eye out for cutback lanes that are opening up. There are a few times when he gets a bit too excited about bouncing his runs outside, but he generally displays good vision with his rush attempts. Brooks is also a really good pass blocker who knows he's as big as a lot of the rushing linebackers. He does a good job identifying his target and getting square with them, and has good knee bend to his blocks. While he can get stuck ducking his head a few times, he generally gives good blocks. Brooks also has really steady hands with only 1 career drops on 84 targets. He catches the ball with good hand technique, and if nothing else, could become a good security blanket for a quarterback. For improvements, while Brooks is a reliable receiver, he lacks upside with just 69 yards on 29 receptions this past season. He actually played a fair number of snaps outside and in the slot and had a variety of routes from the backfield, but he's too slow in his route running, stopping him from being a viable weapon on a number of these plays. He also just doesn't have the acceleration or movement skills, which limits the yards he can pick up in yak situations. In general, Brooks' athleticism also leaves a bit to be desired. He of course doesn't have great long speed, but Brooks also seemed to tick slow with his change of direction ability, with his feet seeming to be just a bit delayed. He can make some decent cuts, but it often takes him a bit to gather himself, and he really struggles to make defenders miss in space. Also, I think better athletes and defenders in the NFL will punish him for needing more time to make his cuts. As I mentioned earlier, Brooks has a tendency to bounce runs outside that just doesn't suit what he does well. He's at his best going forward and straight downfield, but at times he will hesitate and resort to jump cutting outside. He doesn't have great success when cutting outside due to defenders catching up to him, and the players will only get faster and more responsive to these bounce outs in the NFL. In conclusion, Brooks doesn't have a lot of the upside that a lot of the backs ahead of him has, but he is a solid player who could fit a role on a team. He has the makings of a player who could be a solid early down back, but could also help a team on third down and passing downs with his hands and pass blocking if teams are okay with his limited upside in those situations. His biggest fans will likely point to comps of Ramondre Stevenson or prime James Robinson, and while I think those might be a bit lofty right now, I think he's probably closer to a player like Tyler Algier right now. But I could see him surprising people even if Brooks likely ends up falling in the draft after he assumedly doesn't wow in the athletic testing at the combine. Next, at number 13, we have Donovan Edwards out of Michigan. He's listed on ESPN at 6'1", 210 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 2 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a senior who conceded a fair number of touches to Blake Corum, but should have his opportunity as the feature back in Michigan this coming season. For strengths, Edwards is a great receiver running different routes at Michigan these past few years and has always been very reliable. He did have more drops this past season, but he still catches the ball with good hand technique and concentration, and I would expect this to rebound this coming season. Also, Edwards has a very quick transition from receiver to runner to help him pick up a lot of yards in yak situations. If you've ever watched Michigan in the playoffs, you've probably seen Edwards make at least one huge gain. He has some great burst and acceleration to absolutely fly upfield and leave defenders in the dust. Also, his burst shines when he makes cutbacks to pick up some big gains as well. Edwards is also so dangerous in open space. He's a very smooth mover with great curvilinear movement that allows him to weave around defenders and work his way to the end zone. His quick acceleration momentum that he builds up makes it really difficult for defenders to stop him once he's at top speed. For improvements, I still want to see some improvements in Edwards' vision. He's still too indecisive, and there's too many times when he would bounce outside and get himself in trouble. Also, he still seems to struggle reading leverage of blocks and would make some poor decisions because of this. A lot of people wonder why a great athlete like Edwards was losing touches to Corum, and it was due to Corum having fantastic vision while Edwards is still a work in progress in this area. Edwards' contact balance is also just not where it should be where someone with his build. At times he will crumble with contact and lacks the drive to finish runs through defenders due to being too much of an upright runner. Also, he doesn't have a strong base typically with his feet and doesn't always keep his legs churning. In general, he's just a really consistent player from game to game and even play to play. In some plays, he'll look like he's capable of being a top back, blowing past defenders, and in other plays, he's missing holes and leaving yards on the field. His drops this year also brought some possible concern as inconsistencies could bleed into his receiving skills, but like I said earlier, I think that he's a quality receiver and this shouldn't be much of an issue this coming season. In conclusion, Edwards still seems to be more potential than results to me at this time. His flashes have gotten him a lot of fans, but I still just need to see him show those flashes more consistently. Hopefully with Corum leaving for the NFL, Edwards gets some more opportunity to show that he's capable of repeating those flashes more than I'm giving him credit for. Next, number 12, we have Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. He's listed on ESPN at 5'9", 210 pounds, and will be 21 years and 10 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a senior who's been at Rutgers the past 3 seasons and broke out with a strong 2023 season. For strengths, Monangai is so difficult to bring down and finished 8th in the country in forced missed tackles last year. He's small, but he's a wrecking ball that will clobber defenders and keep his balance to get ready to hit another defender. He plays a great pad level and always keeps his legs moving to go through defenders. Speaking of hits, I just love the physicality Monangai brings to every snap. As I mentioned, he brings hard hits in the run game, and pass pro isn't passive for him. Regardless of the situation, he always gives great effort and will never shy away from contact. Monangai also does a great job hugging his blocks and getting skinny through creases. He also shows good vision for cutback opportunities and does a good job setting up his blocks before cutting back. He also has quick feet and good timing to make the most out of his cuts. For improvements, Monangai has very limited receiving experience with just 22 career receptions in 3 seasons. From the games I watched, it didn't seem the team trusted him in receiving situations as they often took him out on 3rd down and in 2-minute situations. Part of the reason could have been due to him having 3 drops on 34 targets, which brought his career drop rate to 12%. He just really needs to get more involved in the receiving game and be more efficient in this area to make himself a more diverse player for the NFL. While it's really exciting to watch Monangai clobber defenders, he sometimes has to just out of necessity. He lacks great long speed and his acceleration is fine, but nothing special. If he wasn't involved in the receiving game much, it'd be one thing, but lacking great athleticism makes me a bit nervous of him more in the NFL. Another thing that concerns me in the NFL is his size. There are a number of times his size stood out as a runner and in pass pro. I think he has a slightly small frame with his size, which also makes things worse. In conclusion, he's a really fun player to watch, but I think we have to be more honest about his limitations as a receiver and athlete. I think he's more than capable of being a very capable early down back in the committee, and I'm hoping that he can show more life as a receiver to increase his upside, but him as an every down back concerns me right now. Next, number 11, we have Damien Martinez out of Miami. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 232 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 2 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who played his first 2 years at Oregon State and then transferred to Miami for the 2024 season. For strengths, Martinez is a menace in space and has a way to beat every type of defender. Corners and safeties struggle to handle his size, linebackers struggle to keep up with his quickness and good timing, plus he's also really difficult to stop at the second level once he gets a full head of steam at 232 pounds and he's just ready to go through defenders. Martinez also has some of the better vision in this group. He ran a high number of zone runs but has a really good eye for cutback lanes and knows how to properly press the line to set up his opening. Also, he's one of the better backs at hugging his blocks to maximize his blocks and his gains on the ground. Martinez also uses his size well to finish runs consistently falling forward. He also has good contact balance and always keeps his legs moving to blow through arm tackles and help get some good gains. For improvements, Martinez has extremely limited production as a receiver. He has 15 career receptions in 2 seasons and a fair number of drops on his limited targets with 2 drops on 20 targets last year. Now the good news is 11 of those receptions came last year, so hopefully another year and a change of scenery to Miami will let him show more in the receiving game. Also, for a back of Martinez's size, I would like to see him have a little bit more consistency as a pass blocker. There are too many times when he ducked his head and had a weak base trying to get to his spot, causing him to have very little impact and staying power in his block. If he isn't going to be overly reliable as a receiver or blocker, it's going to be very easy for teams to justify phasing him out in passing situations. Martinez also needs to do a better job protecting the ball. He had a tendency of losing the ball both his freshman and sophomore years, so he'll need to work on improving this if he's going to be potentially limited to early downs. In conclusion, there's a lot of Martinez that reminds me of Jordan Howard, who I did like when he was coming out of college, but like I mentioned with Monangai, I need to recognize Martinez's limitations. Now, maybe he'll come out and show that he's a more competent receiver than he seems, and that would definitely change his outlook, but right now I just have to see it before trusting it that it isn't a major limitation for him. Finally, getting to our top 10, starting at number 10, we have Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 224 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 3 months old on draft night 2024. He's a junior who's been the second half of the running back tandem with the past 2 years at Penn State. For strengths, I was really impressed with how well Singleton did as a receiver this year. Singleton was much more successful getting targets and showed great transition from receiver to runner and was always able to drive through smaller defenders. He also showed soft hands, and though he would sometimes attack the ball with suboptimal hand technique, he was a reliable receiver this past season. Singleton's efficiency was worse this past season, but it wasn't because he was reading openings worse this year. He still did a good job reading leverage on his blocks, being patient for openings, and hugging his blocks to pick up as many yards as he could. Singleton's dip in production also wasn't due to lack of effort. He still does a good job not being afraid of contact and consistently keeps his legs moving to finish runs going forward. For improvements, Singleton has struggled with fumbles in both his freshman and sophomore seasons, which now makes it a trend. For last year, he would have graded out as a C- for my ball security grading, so he'll need to work on breaking that trend this coming season. Singleton yards after contact also took a fairly large dip this past year, and I think it was due to less consistent pad level. There were a lot of times when he would run upright and would not give himself the good leverage to pair with his size and strength to drive through contact like he did in his freshman year. Where I would also like to see Singleton take a step forward next year is as a pass blocker. He wasn't asked to do this frequently last year and was decent in his freshman year, but was pretty rough this past year with a sloppy base and being too upright in his stance, which stopped him from maximizing his size and strength. He also was often delayed in recognizing his assignment, and while catching the ball better is great, not being able to help much as a blocker will slow him down of how much a team is willing to use him in pass situations. In conclusion, Singleton made some improvements in the receiving game, but took some steps back in the running game. The positive is that he's shown that he's capable in both areas, so if he pulls it all together, he could be back to being one of the most promising backs of this group again. Next, number 9, we have Jadyn Ott out of Cal. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 200 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 4 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a bit of an older junior due to potentially having a gap year in high school, but has been the star for Cal these past 2 seasons. For strengths, Ott will likely be one of the backs that really puts himself on the map during the combine. He has great straight line speed and acceleration and has great burst to be able to explode through holes for huge gains. He also is a smooth mover, being able to move around in the open field and help break pursuit angles. Ott can also maximize his athleticism as a receiver. He has very reliable hands and a very smooth transition to pair with his great acceleration to pick up easy yards. Ott did run a lot of gap runs this past year, which makes things easier for him, but in general he showed really solid vision. A lot of these speedbacks have a tendency to bounce runs outside, but Ott does a good job following his blocks and knowing where his help is. For improvements, Ott's pass blocking needs a lot of work. He's hesitant to initiate contact and has way too much ducking and lunging to get clean hits. He also doesn't do a great job getting his base set, making it even easier for defenders to move around him. At times, he's more of a cone for defenders to get around due to his poor technique and smaller size, and this will need to be something that he improves on in the 2025 season. I would also like to see Ott play with better pad level. A lot of these sprinter one-cut backs run upright to get up to full speed and stay at full speed, but it made Ott too easy to take down. This also caused him to have very little to no push when defenders get him cleanly. If he can find that balance of using his athleticism and getting his pads lower, he could be a really great runner. I would also like to see some more creativity from Ott as a runner. He has a major focus on getting downfield in a hurry, which is good. However, there were times when defenders would get him squared up in space and he didn't have a great answer for them. There were a lot of times when he almost froze with a lot of movement either sideways or even backwards as he was trying to determine the plan to beat the defender, and his slowing down allowed other defenders to catch up. Getting the creativity to make those defenders miss and quickly figuring out a good go-to plan will help him be even more consistent big play threat. In conclusion, if you liked Jalen Wright last year, you're probably going to like Jadyn Ott this next draft cycle. Like Wright, Ott has great speed and acceleration to pair with solid receiving ability. Ott has shown a bit more ability to be a workhorse than Wright, but isn't as good of a pass blocker that Wright was, which could limit his playing time. However, if Ott improves in his pass blocking and goes to the right team, he could really be a great value pick for a team in next year's draft. Next, number 8, we have Raheem Rocket Sanders out of South Carolina. He's listed on ESPN at 6'2", 242 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 10 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a senior who spent his first 3 seasons at Arkansas but transferred to South Carolina for the 2024 season. Also, he missed the majority of his 2023 season due to a knee injury early in the season, and then tore his labrum in the team's final game. For restraints, while Sanders' play was held back due to injury this past year, his vision was still clear. Sanders does a great job hugging his blocks and takes very efficient passes with the ball. He also does a great job subtly manipulating defenders and pressing the line to open up bigger opportunities for himself. Also, it probably isn't surprising that back that's 6'2", 242 pounds is hard to bring down, but of course need to include that in his strengths. Sanders is capable of trucking through defenders, but also does a good job adjusting his positioning to force weaker tackles that he can easily shed out of. Also, though his yards after contact went down this year, his forced missed tackle per rush attempt increased from last year. Sanders is the most dynamic receiver and certainly wasn't this past year due to his injury, but he has really reliable hands and has shown that he can handle a fair amount of volume in the receiving game. He also has shown the ability to line up out wide and in the slot, which, to be honest, I don't think he'll be doing this very often in the NFL, but it is encouraging that he can handle those duties at his size. For improvements, and this is something more of that Sanders can't really do too much about, but it's likely and was likely impacted by his knee injury, but he lacks top-end speed and acceleration, stopping him from blowing past defenders. He still has good athleticism for his size and will likely have a good RAS score with his size, but he likely won't be putting up big gains in the NFL on a routine basis. There are also too many times when Sanders would get a bit too fancy at times with his hard jukes and moves to try to shake off defenders. There are definitely times when this worked, especially in 2022 when he was healthy, but there were a number of times when they were ineffective and he lost potential yards that he could have picked up if he just lowered his shoulder. Sanders' ball security could also use some work, as it graded out as a C using my usual scale. So it's not terrible, but not ideal. He does run a little loose with the ball, especially when breaking tackles, so he'll need to focus when avoiding hits. As someone who has the build for a large workload of healthy, he'll need to show more consistency holding onto the ball to be able to keep a possible workhorse status. In conclusion, I'm still a believer in Sanders' talent, and I'm willing to throw away a lot of last year due to his knee injury. That could come back to bite me if he struggles again this coming season, but he still just has a really well-rounded skill set that stood out to me in 2022. I'm hoping that he can get himself back on the map with a strong and healthy 2024 season. Next, number 7, we have Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. He's listed on ESPN at 5'9", 205 pounds, and he'll be 20 years and 9 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who spent the first 2 years at Florida, but transferred to Georgia for the 2024 season. For his strengths, Etienne plays a great pad level and isn't afraid of taking on hits. He does a good job keeping his legs moving and consistently moving forward on his runs. A lot of people may look at his build and assume he's a shifty one-cut back, which he's definitely capable of, but he also has great drive and balance to finish his runs. Etienne's burst is also great and really lets him excel at times in zone runs. Etienne has a burst to plant his foot and explode upfield and blow past defenders. He doesn't have elite long speed, but his burst lulls defenders in and lets them break off big gains. Etienne hasn't been the most productive receiver, but he has been one of the most reliable receivers. He actually has a perfect record of all of his targets leading to reception, which actually is extremely rare, as you usually don't see that, as there's usually at least one poor throw by the quarterback or a drop that breaks that streak. But anyways, getting back to the real points, he has really soft hands and catches the ball with good hand technique, and he also has really good transition from receiver to runner, and I'm hoping that Georgia unlocks him more as a receiver this coming season. That being said, if Etienne is going to be used more in the receiving game, he needs to become a more efficient route runner. It seems like he knows where his spot is, but rushes there and doesn't do much to fool the defense. Also, he ran incredibly simple routes and will need to expand his route tree if he wants to be used more as a receiver. On that note of him rushing things on his routes, he also rushes his runs too much. Etienne usually comes in with a full head of steam, which is great to finish his runs forward, but he doesn't always allow his blocks to develop in front of him. It also is just hard to know if Etienne can be trusted with a full workload. In his 24 career games, he only reached 20 touches in a single game. With the way Georgia rotates their backs, I don't see that changing, so it'll likely remain a question mark for him at the next level. In conclusion, Etienne is a bit of a frustrating player, as I feel he has the potential to be better. Right now, he kind of reminds me of a smaller Rachaad White with his reliability but lack of nuance. Now, people are down on White, but I think White would be a high-end projection of Etienne right now. However, if he can develop more as a receiver at Georgia and get the vision and nuance that a lot of the recent Georgia backs seem to be getting, he might have a chance of getting close to that projection. Next, at number 6, we have Devin Neal out of Kansas. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 210 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 8 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a young senior who's been at Kansas for the past 3 seasons. For his strengths, Neal has great movement skills that allow him to weave around defenders and sneak through holes. His curvilinear movement paired with his acceleration gives defenders a lot of issues in the open space and forces them to take clean pursuit angles. He also has really quick and well-timed feet that make him hard to take down in open space. On top of all that, he has great acceleration to immediately let him get to full speed when he decides to turn on the jets and can blow past defenders. Also, Neal has quality vision that stands out and had good success in a mix of zone and gap runs. He seems at his best in gap as he can get caught looking at times in zone, but he typically does a good job letting his blocks develop and then using his burst to break down the field. He also does a good job using his tempo to allow blocks to get set up and then sneak around his blocks for some big gains. Neal also has some great soft hands and reliably catches the ball. Also, he's very capable of catching the ball away from his body and can reel catches in if needed. He also has a seamless transition from receiver to runner that lets him instantly get to full speed. For improvements, I like to see Neal with more consistent pad level. He will at times drop his pads, but other times he gets caught focusing his eyes while trying to find a hole or trying to get through a hole and allows an arm tackle to take him down. If he can use his burst and still have good pad level while breaking through, he can more reliably break off some big gains in the NFL. Neal's pass blocking also is pretty lackluster. There are a lot of whiffs and lunges and just overall pretty poor fundamentals. For someone who could really contribute on passing downs, he needs to become a more consistent blocker to earn opportunities in these situations. It likely isn't something that Neal will be expected to do regularly in the NFL, but Neal often struggled when a defender got him square and he would need to drive through them to pick up extra yards. He's more of a juke him out type of back, which still helps him a lot, but that'll likely limit him a bit in the red zone at the next level. In conclusion, I was kind of surprised Neal didn't declare for the draft last year. I think at worst he would have been the third running back taken, and honestly, I don't think it would have been crazy if he was the first back taken with Jonathan Brooks' ACL. Now that he's declaring for a much deeper draft class, it unfortunately makes him a bit lost in the shuffle and will be taken later than expected in the 2025 draft. However, he's still a very good player who can contribute on the ground and in the air and will likely be an immediate contributor for our team. Finally, getting to our top 5, at number 5 we have Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State. He's listed on ESPN at 6'1", 211 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 3 months old on draft day in 2025. He's a junior who broke out in his first year as a starter at Oklahoma State last year. Despite being a taller back, Gordon has quick feet and the agility to make quick cuts and adjust to collapsing lanes. His quick feet and good timing with his moves also let him sidestep defenders and slide off arm tackles. He's also quick with his feet to do high knees and avoid ankle tackles even in congested areas. He definitely can get a bit too fancy at times, but in general he does a really nice job moving away from defenders, which makes him a defender's nightmare trying to take him down one-on-one in open space. Gordon also does a really nice job getting tight and hugging his blocks. A number of shifty backs will rely too much on bouncing runs outside, but Gordon does a good job getting up to his blocks and using his quick feet to get around defenders. In general, he also seemed to have a pretty good eye for reading leverage of his blocks. It's also pretty impressive that with the versatility that Gordon showed with really just being 1 year as a major producer. He showed that he can handle a bell cow workload, he can be relied on in the passing game, and he can provide a spark with some big plays at times. While I have a little bit of concern that he isn't amazing at one specific thing as a back, he is at worst a very safe player that should have a place in a team's rotation. For improvements, as I mentioned, this was Gordon's first year as a starter, so hopefully this improves this coming season, but I'd really like to see Gordon improve his tempo on his runs. He runs very one speed, which makes it easy for defenders to stop him, and his one speed is often too fast, where his blocks don't develop in front of him. This causes him to run into his blocks a few too many times and forces much more creativity than may have been needed if he just slowed down a bit in his approach. He also just doesn't have elite acceleration. It definitely isn't bad by any means, but it just isn't something of like the names ahead of him that can make one cut and just burst upfield for a big gain. He also doesn't really help his case by going to his sidestep move a bit too often and killing some of his momentum. His lack of acceleration also showed at times on his routes as he was a bit slow and sloppy getting in and out of his cuts. With this being his first year as a starter, it's not surprising that he has some cleaning up to do as a pass blocker. The effort is there, but he kind of just throws his body and dives at rushers at times and needs to work on making more sound and consistent blocks. Also, he had a fair number of drops, which could be a non-issue this coming season, but something he'll need to want to prove that isn't a continuing theme for him this coming season. In conclusion, Gordon is a very solid player and one that I think others could be higher on based on him showing that he can handle nearly every task that's asked of a running back. I think his lack of elite acceleration may hold him back behind the other backs I have ahead of him. Also, I just will need to see some more nuance to his runs and cleaner third down and receiving play to show that he can be counted on in these situations at a similar rate in the NFL. Next, number 4, we have TreVeyon Henderson out of Ohio State. He's listed on ESPN at 5'10", 212 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 6 months old on draft day in 2025. He's a senior who played at Ohio State these past 3 seasons, but missed time in 2022 due to a foot injury and 2023 due to an ankle injury. For strengths, Henderson is still extremely elusive and can play with some great pad level. He doesn't quite have the contact balance of the top backs in this draft class, but he does always do a good job getting his pads low with a sturdy base to withstand hits. Also, he uses his shiftiness well to move off of hits and has great timing to make guys miss on a routine basis. Henderson was also one of the more solid pass protectors last season and has been one of the most consistent blockers during his time in college. He's quick to recognize his target, gets square with them, and delivers clean, technically sound hits. He has all the makings to be able to earn all the third down snaps on a team's offense. Henderson also has really solid hands and started to pick up some momentum in the receiving game when he returned from injury last year that will hopefully be able to continue and carry over into the coming season. While Henderson lacks elite speed, he has excellent burst. He also runs with great tempo to his runs to draw defenders in and then can make a sharp cutback to leave them in the dust. Also, his great burst allows him to wait until the very last second before a defender goes for a tackle to sidestep them and make them miss. For improvements, Henderson still bounces too many runs outside. When he's working inside, he does a good job navigating the mess, but when it's an outside run, there's just too many times when it seems like he's just waiting for an opportunity to break it outside instead of following his blocks. While he has good speed, he doesn't have elite speed to get away with this at the next level. On that note of breakaway speed, he lacks elite speed, which is sometimes crucial for a smaller back like himself. It's not a necessity and not something that will hold him back as a possible starter in the NFL, but something that could limit his ceiling slightly. Also, injuries are often fluky, but missing multiple games in consecutive seasons could make teams concerned about Henderson's durability. Being paired with Quinshon Judkins this coming season should hopefully reduce his injury risk, but if he gets injured again, I think a lot of people will become very concerned about his longevity as a starter. In conclusion, last summer I had Henderson as my top back in a rather weak running back class. With a much deeper class and injuries popping up for him again, he unfortunately is lower on this list. That being said, he's a pretty great player who I think really just needs to focus on staying healthy this year. He could get lost in the shuffle with the other younger backs, especially if his production takes a dip with Judkins being there, but he really is a quality player that I think should be an easy day 2 selection for a team. Next, number 3, we have Omarion Hampton out of UNC. He's listed on ESPN at 6 foot, 220 pounds, and he'll be 22 years and 1 month old on draft night in 2025. He's a slightly older junior who stepped in the starter role last year at UNC. For strengths, Hampton is a thick boy. He's a bowling ball at times, easily shedding arm tackles with absolutely no fear of contact. There were so many times when defenders would try to wrap him up, but he would just slide right off him thanks to his balance and strength. He also has good timing with his cuts to force defenders into weaker tackles they can break through. Hampton is also extremely smooth in the open field. He can easily move around the field with ease with his great curvilinear movement, and is good at using his blocks downfield. When he doesn't have a block ready downfield, he can use his smooth movement and quickness to make defenders miss in the open field. Hampton also shows the skill set to help on third down. While he didn't have an overly diverse route tree, he has really reliable hands and is a tough pass protector. He definitely has some things he can clean up in pass protection, but he won't let a defender run him over. For improvements, despite really good size, Hampton doesn't get much push when defenders get him square. This is mostly due to his upright nature and something that doesn't let him play at his best. It's the same type of issue I had with Trey Benson last summer, where both players still broke a lot of tackles, but they could be even more dominant with their contact balance if they consistently get their pads at good level. Something that also stood out with Hampton was him being a bit too eager for contact, whether that was going into a defender instead of setting up for a better run, or getting a bit too trigger happy in pass pro and taking himself outside of the play too early. With another year as a starter, hopefully he can find that right balance between aggression and smart play. On that note of finding that balance, I also feel like he needs to find that balance with his vision. There are too many times when he was willing to settle and just duck his head and try to pick up a few yards. If he can just get a bit more patient or even a slightly better eye for blocks that are opening holes for him with another year of experience, it could really help him be a more explosive player. In conclusion, Hampton is a quality player and someone who could develop into a great running back. He has the NFL size, athleticism, contact balance, and hands to be a do-it-all back. If he can clean up his pad level and get more comfortable as a runner and blocker, he could really fly. Next, number 2, we have Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. He's listed on ESPN at 5'11", 210 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 6 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who played his first 2 years at Ole Miss and then transferred to Ohio State for the 2024 season. Starting with strengths, Judkins' balance is his greatest strength as he was number 4 in the country last year in forced missed tackles for runners with at least 100 carries. Judkins knows how to position himself while getting a strong base to bounce off of arm tackles. He does a great job almost always being the lowest player at the point of contact, and it's not often that the first tackler is able to bring him down. He can also get really skinny to sneak through defenders and creases in his blocks. Judkins also has great vision and ran a perfectly even split of zone and gap runs last year with good success with both. He also does a good job hugging blocks to make the most of his blocking, even with Ole Miss not creating as many open lanes for him last year. He also has a nice balance of patience, but enough urgency to not allow defenders to crash his surroundings. He also does a really good job to be able to set up his blocks and catching defenders over pursuing and then cutting back inside. With Judkins' ability to get defenders biting outside, he has great burst to be able to make one cut and rush downfield. His burst keeps defenders guessing and helps him make up for his lack of elite speed and allows him to be an explosive runner in the open field. For improvements, he needs to improve in pass pro if he wants to see the field on third down in the NFL. He does a good job identifying his assignment and getting square with his target, but he's a huge head ducker and completely loses his base at the start of the block. He also had a fair number of whiffs, which will be unacceptable in the NFL. The effort is always there, it's just the technique is really rough right now. Due to his strugglings as a blocker, Judkins hasn't gotten very many opportunities to catch the ball and wasn't really used much in the slot or out wide. He only had 17 targets in 2022 and 26 last year. When he did get a target, his hands seemed to have decent hand technique, but he still had 2 drops on 26 targets this past year. My biggest fear about him going to Ohio State is that Travion Henderson will continue to get the majority of passing game work, and Judkins will continue to be questionable in the receiving opportunities. Also, this isn't a major concern for me since I mentioned he has the balance and vision to be a great runner in the NFL, but Judkins likely won't be lighting up the combine next year. I think he has good straight line speed and overall athleticism, but he likely won't be breaking off big runs and outrunning players this year or in the NFL. In conclusion, Judkins is a really good player who is ready to handle a heavy workload in the NFL. What scares me is how much he'll be able to contribute in the receiving game. I think if a team is okay with him going to committee, then he'll be a great back for them and will be able to help them on the ground for the next several years. If they plan for him to be a do-it-all back, he might be able to handle it, but he'll just have to prove he can handle both duties consistently. Finally, at number 1, we have Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. He's listed on ESPN at 5'9", 210 pounds, and he'll be 21 years and 4 months old on draft night in 2025. He's a junior who started to get more of a full workload at Boise State last year and will continue to do so this coming season. For strengths, Jeanty has natural hands and looked very comfortable catching the ball away from his frame. He showed his prowess as a receiver with the second best yards per route run of all starting running backs last year in college. He didn't do a ton of damage from the slot or out wide, but was quick and efficient in getting out on his routes and getting ready for the ball. He's probably the best back in the class at catching the ball and instantly transitioning from a receiver to runner. Also, I don't know if I would consider it a strength just yet, but he seemed very capable as a pass blocker at his size. At worst, all these strengths will make a team very excited about having him on third downs. Jeanty also makes himself a lot more interesting with some of the best contact balance of this group. He was number 3 in the country in forced missed tackles and yards after contact per attempt of all college backs with at least 100 carries. He has a good eye and understanding of how to manipulate defenders when they're going for hits to hold his ground despite his smaller stature. He also always finds a way to finish runs going forward, which is extremely impressive for someone his size. To top it all off, Jeanty is an absolute threat with the ball in his hands. He's a very explosive player with very quick acceleration and can pick up yards in an instant. He glides downfield and has great control of his speed and acceleration to be able to alter the defender's pursuit angles and give him a chance to break off an even bigger gain. For improvements, Jeanty can be as big of a playmaker as he wants, but if he doesn't hold on to the ball more consistently, he won't be given the opportunity to make those plays. He had 5 fumbles last year, which if I were grading him with that year with my ball handling scale, he would have earned a D in that area. A lot of backs have lapses of ball security, especially when their workload increases like Jeanty's did, so hopefully he had a focus on this in the offseason. Jeanty's vision can also be a bit disappointing at times. He doesn't always do a great job setting up his blocks and gives too much space between himself and his blockers, forcing larger passes that he needs to take. He also seemed a bit delayed in reading his leverage on his blocks and gave up some yards on the field. He also tries to rely too much on balancing his runs too often, and that being said, while there are flashes when he shows some really great vision, I'm hoping that he's able to pull it all together next year. Also, Jadyn is listed at 5'9", 210 pounds, but I kind of have a hard time believing he's either of these. In games, he comes off as more as potentially 5'8", and maybe right around 200 pounds, which I know those aren't major differences, but those changes get him right in that area where it becomes more rare that he's capable of handling a full workload in the NFL. In conclusion, I'm clearly a big fan of Jadyn, and I was a bit surprised looking at different consensus boards, as I thought I would see at least a few with Jadyn at the top of their list and above Judkins. However, I really can only find Jordan Reed that had Jadyn above Judkins like I do. Judkins has been great and will continue to be great at Ohio State, but Jadyn looks like the more full package. I think some will point to the level of competition that Jadyn faced, but there's been so many running backs that have come from small schools and excelled in the NFL that I think it shows that this isn't as big of a concern as some people like to make it. I think if you're looking for the best pure rusher and someone who could likely help for regardless of what type of offense they're in, Judkins is undeniably your guy. However, if you're looking for someone who can do it all for your team and someone who can really be an ace player for a team with a creative offensive mind, Jadyn has to be your guy. And that concludes the running backs. I think this is a much deeper class than the 2024 class and likely the best running back class we've had since 2020. I'm not confident about putting it as high as the 2017 class, as that class was overflowing with talent, but it has the potential to get there depending on how the players develop. Right now I see Jadyn as a likely first rounder based on his upside, and I could see Judkins as a late first rounder if he's able to show more as a receiver. Hampton, Henderson, Gordon all feel like they're likely going to get round 2 draft capital, but I wouldn't be surprised if any of them start to get some round 1 attention. With a ridiculous amount of talent, I'm sure everyone's rankings will be all over the place for this group, so let me know if there's any players you think that I'm too high or too low on. Also, let me know if there's any players you think that I missed that I should check out. You can let me know by commenting below or sending me a message on Twitter or X or at Reddit at Backseat Scout. Also, to plug a site I'm contributor for again, you can check out Fantasy Trading Room if you want to check out any of my other work. Also, just as there's a lot of running backs, there are of course a lot of receivers that I'll be going through. So it'll likely take me a little bit longer to get through my receiver rankings, and I probably won't be able to get them out for about 2 weeks or so, but if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe. And while you're at it, like the video as it would mean a lot and help the channel continue to get off to a good start thanks to you. Thank you all again and see you guys next time.